Why does America favor Israel? It seems as though American politicians and American media outlets seem to be favoring Israel. The use of certain language and rhetoric as well as media coverage that paints Israel as the victim and Palestine as the bad guy. I've seen interviews of Israelis talking about the attacks. The NFL referring to the conflict as a terrorist attack on Israelis. Commercials asking for donations for Israel. etc. But I have yet to see much empathy for Palestine when it seems not too long ago Free Palestine wasn't controversial. As an American, one honestly have no idea where to stand on this conflict or if I even have the right or need to have an opinion. All I can say is all violence and war and genocide is horrible. But why does American favor Israel over Palestine? It honestly only makes me want to gain a larger perspective and understand why or if Palestine is in the wrong. At this point I just assume both sides are equal and deserving of peace. No one is giving credit to the US for pressuring Israel to allow water to enter Gaza. That was some top-level diplomacy right there. These were terrorist attacks. So there is a strong reaction sentiment towards that. There is also a realization that is evolving that Palestinians should not be unilaterally punished for these actions. This is actually one of the first times I can remember where there was such an even-handed presentation. Hopefully this dialogue progresses. Political gain. America backing Israel gives them an ally in the Middle East that they can trust and align with on issues fully. They also make a lot from arms sales as well as intelligence cooperation on neighboring countries. Because Israel is the most reliable and most similar to US in terms of civics and politics. Culture-wise, Israel and the US are more closely aligned. Also, Israel has in general always been more friendly than a majority of its neighbors to the US. Add to it that there has been a decent-sized Jewish population in America for several decades that has political power or influence. Yeah, there is some Palestinian sympathy, but it's recent and much smaller. Social media and some celebrities have jumped on the bandwagon for clout as it's different. You have to take in account the xenophobia created by various terror attacks Islamic groups have been responsible for as well that is still very widespread. Palestine is closely allied with Russia and Iran, both of which are very anti-American. They were anti-American before the US chose to ally itself with Israel, and will continue to be anti-American even if the US renounces its alliance with Israel. So while others have given good reasons as to why the US chose to ally with the only other democracy in the region, it is also kind of obvious that the US isn't going to ally with countries that host regular Death to America rallies. Interesting, that is your take. It seems to me that US media are more neutral on this issue and called out both sides. There are news stories covering humanitarian disasters in Gaza too, as well as stories on Hamas terrorists' attack. While a lot of European media outlets are very sheepish for failing to call Hamas terrorist organizations and seems to be sided more with Palestine. Like seriously, if they are not terrorists, who are terrorists? It doesn't matter whether Israel is objectively in the right or in the wrong. The US will continue to favor it because doing so gives them a powerful ally in the Middle East, a region otherwise not predisposed to favoring American foreign policy. Both sides are not equal. Hamas is a terrorist group that kills civilians including women and children and brutally rapes and kills as part of their terrorist strategy. They're human garbage and not equivalent to Israel at all. Because the other side is Palestine, Iran, China. The US needs Israel as an ally in this region. It's a political stance, not a moral one. Are there any modern, progressive, democracies that the US doesn't support? Why wouldn't we? Israel is more westernized, secularized, and is a strong ally with America. The Islamic world in the Middle East rejects Westernism, our values, and admonishes us, calling for death to America and the like. No one seems to be mentioning the obvious. It's because it's a Jewish state. If it weren't, everyone would treat it as your run-of-the-mill Middle Eastern conflict. People see an attack on a Jewish state as one-sided given their history, and there is a lot of anti-Semitism floating around. Your average American probably isn't that up to date on the horrific policies of the Israeli government. That's not to say they don't deserve our support. Having a somewhat democratic ally in the region is helpful. But the US largely writes Israel a blank check because it's a Jewish state. It's an extremely one-sided alliance, though. Your heart is in the right place. It's a very complicated situation of which Americans will only hear one side. What Hamas did was horrific and unforgivable 100. But not entirely unprovoked. What Israelis have been doing to Palestinians for decades has also been horrific. Look it up, it's insane. As to why we favor Israel, they prob have the moral high ground, although not by much. And as usual, I'm sure money and power play a major part in how Americans are broadcasted. You might want to research what AIPAC is and how much money they spend annually lobbying the U.S. government. I'm not saying this is the only reason, but it is a part of it. They also have a low-key lobbying arm that spends millions to oppose any female congressional candidate that supports or might support the squad. U.S. politicians are mostly Christian, and there is a widespread prophecy among Christians that Israel will win. And this event brings about the second coming of Jesus. I imagine their support is an attempt to spur on the realization of that prophecy. Because Israel is in the moral right and Hamas is a terrorist group that hides behind and targets civilians. How hard is that to understand? 70 years of carefully cultivated propaganda, political deals, the Cold War, and religious zealots on all sides. Edit and a healthy dose of racism. I think you throw the first punch, you better be ready to take it. Israel is done playing games with the lives of their citizens. Too bad Gaza wants to use theirs as shields. But of course no one wants to talk about the leaders in Hamas living in Qatar. Should start with them. It's a vassal state. We don't think of it that way because this is the 21st century. But Israel is the extension of American presence in the Middle East. I suspect that if Palestine was buying billions of dollars of anything from the U.S. yearly, the U.S. would be a lot more conflicted over which side to support. The U.S. has a hard time convincing its population to support its own war veterans in real terms. Not just symbolism and propaganda, let alone people in other countries. America's support of Israel comes mainly from the evangelical population. They honestly believe they need to support Israel in order to bring about the second coming of Christ. It's pretty fucked. Take a look into Israel and Palestine for yourself. Take note of events such as the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the war in Israel in 1948. Also take a look into the amount of UN resolutions condemning Israel and their treatment of Palestinians for the last 70 years. It's a literal ethnic cleansing operation against the Palestinians. It's a sick, twisted policy the US and Israel have come to. Israel is an ally. Israel is running the US in Afghanistan playbook to destabilize Gaza and the West Bank. We want to have a foothold in the region so we can continue to extract oil from the region. Lastly, America is racist, warmongering country. Our leadership has chosen the people they actually consider people. And the racists will cheer when the people they've labeled as enemies die.